Boker Tov. Today's Daf Yomi is Kesubos Chaf Kesubos 21. Well, let's start at the Mishnah on Chaf Amud Beis on 20b. The Mishnah says at the bottom, Ze Omer Zek Sav Yodi. If you have two witnesses, one witness comes forward and says, "This is my handwriting." V'Zek Sav Yado Shachavirai, and this is the handwriting of my colleague. The other co-witness, Zelmer Zek Savyadi. This one says, "This is my handwriting." Zek Savyado Shachaverai, and this is my colleague's handwriting. Then we're going to believe the testimony. We're going to believe each one. However, Zelmer Zek Savyadi, Zelmer Zek Savyadi. But let's say each one only testifies about their own handwriting. Then, under those circumstances, you need to get another witness from the street to come and testify with them and to make it the two witnesses testifying about the signatures. Because each one is only testifying about their own signature. That is the position of Rabbi. Chachamim say, no, you don't need to get somebody else to come from the street to testify to make it two witnesses for each signature. Each person is believed to say that this is my handwriting. And we'll see why in the Gemara. And according to the Chachamim, they're not testifying about the signatures. In that case, they're really testifying about the content of the shtar, as the Gemara is about to say now. When you analyze this at its core, we see with Divrei Rebbe that according to Rebbe on the top of Aleph from an Aleph, that Rebbe who says you need two witnesses, you need to get another witness from the street to come and testify with you. They're testifying according to Rebbe. We needed two witnesses to testify about each signature. And therefore, if it's the only one who's testifying to his signature is the one witness, that's not going to be sufficient. You're going to need a second witness from the street to testify about the signature. Whereas the Divrei Chachamim, the Chachamim say they're each just testifying about the money in the contract. And therefore, since the money in the contract is they're really just testifying about the money in the contract. And so therefore, since we need to have two witnesses on the money in the contract, so each witness who testifies to his own signature, that's basically two witnesses on the money of the contract. And therefore, the Chacham say you only need one witness, each witness only needs to testify about himself. So the Gemara says, well, Pshita, it's obvious. That's literally what the Mishnah is telling us. So why do we need this statement of the Gemara? The Gemara explains, Maldatema might have said, well, Rebbe Sipuke Misabkile. You actually could have said that Rebbe, when he requires another witness to combine another person from the street to combine with the witness on the document, you might have said that Rebbe actually was uncertain as to what the halacha was. He was uncertain if they're testifying about the signatures, in which case you would need another witness to testify about the signature that this person signed. Or is the testimony about the money in the contract? Well, if that's the case, you already have two witnesses. Each one says my signature is this one. Now you have two witnesses on the contract. But well, why do we care? What's the difference in this analysis? Where one of the witnesses died. So then under those circumstances, let's say Reuven and Shimon were the signatories on the document and Shimon died. Then Reuven can no longer attest that Shimon is the second signature. And we'll see why in a second in the Gemara, but instead you need two other people, Levi and Yehuda, come from the marketplace to testify to Shimon's signature. Because if you're going to allow Reuven to testify, if you're going to allow Reuven to testify, then what's going to happen is that you're having 3/4 of the witnesses testifying. Hold on one second. We are having 3/4 of the signatures testifying to you're having 3/4 of the testimony coming from one person. When Torah says you need 2 witnesses, it means you need half from each one. So if you're testifying about the Mammon Shabashtar, that's what if that's what Rebbe is choshesh for, then the Chachamim would always require 2 separate witnesses to come from the street to be supporting that, and so therefore Rebbe would require it, and so therefore we might have been concerned that that Rebbe is adopting the stringencies of both. He's requiring 2 witnesses on each signature, but he's also requiring 2 separate witnesses on the second signature in a situation where the second witness has died. And so therefore we might have thought that we see that Rebbe is actually, it's clear to him that Bein L'Kula, Bein L'Chumra, both lenient and strict. Rebbe's of the position that they're testifying about the signatures and not about the mana. And so therefore, according to Rebbe, you don't need a second witness coming from the. You can combine the first signatory, in this case Ruvain, with a person from the street to support Shimon's testimony. Hold on, we see a question here. Let's see the question. The question is, why not addition? They do print name here. Well, we see that there are other things that they do. We're going to get to the fact that they're going to get into what we call notarizing the document today. There are different ways of being certifying the contract. We're talking about a court that used this way. So the Gemara says, the Amar Rav Yehuda Amarav Shnayim Chasuman Al Ashtar, and indeed the Gemara supports this position. The Rebbe says, Bein L'Kula, Bein L'Chumra, we're going to say they're testifying about the signatures on the document. Because Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav Shnayim Chasuman Al Ashtar, let's say there are 2 signatories on the contract, and one of them died. So there are 2 signatories. That's the case we were just talking about. And one of them died. That you need, says Rav, you need 2 people from the marketplace to come and testify to support this second signature. And you can't combine it with the other signature. You can't say, let's say Reuben was the other signatory in the contract. He can't testify. That's the position of the Chachamim. And the Gemara explains, in this case, the Rebbe is adopting the lenient approach that Ruvain, who's the other signatory, he can combine with somebody from the marketplace. You don't need 2 separate people. Whereas the Rabbanan are L'Chumra, the Rabbanan are strict because they say Amana Shabashtari made, and they're testifying about the money. So therefore, you need 2 separate witnesses. Let's say you don't have 2 other people from the marketplace who could testify to Shimon's signature, and Ruvain knows for sure that it is Shimon's signature. So what do? You see, we're seeing here that there's another method of certifying it. So Amar Abaye, Lichtov Chasimas Yadei Achaspa. So what he should do is he should write his own signature on a pottery shard. A pottery shard is not something that you would use for a contract. It's something that they would just write their signatures on. And then you could give that to the court. And the court can certify that this was indeed Ruvain's signature, and the court is going to certify Ruvain's signature as valid. So then, therefore, he doesn't need to testify about his own signature. And so now Reuven can combine with somebody from the marketplace, and he can combine on the other signature. And so that's how you don't lose the testimony. But the Gemara says this only works about a pottery shard. But if it was on a scroll where people would write notes like "I owe you money," then you don't sign it. Lo Dilma Mishkacha Inish. Because we're worried somebody's going to find it. Inish Mali, a person who's no good. Because of Eloi, my Dubai, and he'll write on it. Oh, I have a signed. It's like a blank check. I have a signed blank check. He'll write on it whatever he wants. I'm going to let's say a person takes out a document. He says, "Look, it says that you owe me $100. That I lent you $100. It was between me and you was a sale. There's no witnesses on it. But if you just write a note and I owe you money, then it's enforceable. You can you can collect from his assets that he has in the free and clear. So we see from here that indeed there's another way of certifying the document. But you have to be careful not to put it on a scroll, but only put it on a pottery chart. Joseph says you could also put on the top of the document, and then it will also avoid that problem, because the signature has to be on the bottom. So if you put on the top, nobody can add anything on top of it. Laws like the Chachamim, that you need two witnesses to come from the street to support the second signature if the second signature had died. Gemara says, wasn't that obvious? You have an individual against the majority. Of course, the law is like the majority. Gemara says, no. We have a principle throughout the Shas that the law is like Rebbe from when he argues with his colleague. And I might have thought the law is like when he argues with his colleague, even from his colleagues, is plural. We don't say that. The law is like, says Shmuel, the law is like the Chachamim. So the Gemara says, Sima nachnad chad. Amalei Rav Chana bar Chil, Rav Yehuda bar Rav Huna bar Yehuda, Rav Yehuda bar Amalei, Rav Chil bar Yehuda, Rav Yehuda. So three different shitos of what was said to Rav Yehuda. It said, the Shmuel say the law is like the Chachamim, and the law is not like Rebbe. Is that really the case? Shmuel had a bezdin, and the contracts used to go out of a Shmuel because of they mida asa Ravanan Barchia Ised Achasimos Yodei Adachad Ame. And Shmuel wrote in this contract that was coming out of his court. He said that Rav Chanan bar Rabba came and he testified about his own signature, and he also testified about the signature of the one who is with him, which is okay according to Rebbe, but not according to Chachamim. The Chachamim say it wouldn't be sufficient. Umanu, and who is the one who tied with him, who signed with him? Rav Anan bar Chia Ashrinu v'kaminu kidechazi. So he says we support this contract just like we saw. So anyway, we see from this point that they certified the documents, and so we see that Shmuel requires a signature from him and from another person, and so we see from here it's not like Rabbanan. Rabbanan says that each one can say I'm testifying by my own signature, and that would be sufficient. And Shmuel required, like Rebbe, a signature from him and somebody else. So the Gemara says, so why is Shmuel ruling like Rebbe? If you just said above that Shmuel says, oh, like the Chachamim. I'm like, who started the Yasmi? No, that was not just a note between two people. That was a contract that the orphans had brought. The orphans had brought, and so therefore there's a special obligation to make sure the orphans are not getting defrauded, and so therefore, what did Shmuel do? Shmuel was concerned that if he would just write, this person testified about his signature, and this person testified about his signature, that perhaps when the orphans will take out their contract to collect it in a different bet-in, that bet-in will make a mistake, and they'll think the law is like Rebbe, and they'll say this star is not certified. And so therefore, Shmuel was concerned about a mistaken corpus. Some people will think that the law is like Rebbe, not only when he argues with his friend, in general, like his chaver, but not like his chaver, but in this case, even like his multiple colleagues. And so therefore, Saver Avid Ravacha, he says, I'll do an extra stringency, I'll require an extra witness here, so that the orphans don't lose out in this court. Let's say you have a contract, a star that's written on in a handpick. A handpick is when the bet in the court writes on it, we've certified this document, like a notary. And it's basically a notary. The notary says, we certify that these signatures are on this document. So here we have the court of three that writes a handpick. And the judges sign it. And after a period of time, when the lender comes to collect it, the borrower says it's forged. And one of the witnesses on the contract testifies that this is his handwriting. And one of the judges testified that this is his handwriting. So one of the judges on the handpick and one of the witnesses on the contract, they both come forward and say this is a valid contract. So Rabbi Yehuda Mashmuel says, Eid v'dayim mistarfa, we combine the witness and the judge to say and uphold this contract, because we have the witness from the contract and we have the handpick and the judge from the handpick. So Amar Rami Bar Chama, Kama Maya Hashmata. Rami Bar Chama says, this teaching of Rabbi Yehuda and Mashmuel is beautiful. Kama Maya Hashmata. So Amar Rava says, what are you talking about? There's nothing good here. My mal yusa, this is wrong. What's the benefit here? My the kamasid sahada or kamasid dayana. My the kamasid dayana or kamasid sahada. The judge and the witness are really testifying about two different things. The witness is saying this is my signature, that we signed the contract, and the judge is saying that this contract is this document was certified. So they're testifying about two different things. One is they saying it's my signature, and the other judge is saying we have one witness, one judge saying it's certified. We need more than one. So that's not okay. Don't pay attention to these principles. So Rami Bar Cheskel said, don't listen to these principles that my brother Shmuel established, that my brother Yehuda established in the name of Shmuel. That's what Yechezkel, the brother of Yehuda, Rami Bar Yechezkel said in the name of he said, don't listen to those principles that my brother Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel. Ikla Rabbana, we're on the top of 21b. Ikla Rabbana, Ikla Rabbanai. Achud Rabbi Chia Bar Abba, Mizban Shum Shemi. Rabbanai, the brother of Rabbi Chia Bar Abba, came to buy sesame. It has nothing to do with anything. He's just telling us that while he was involved in buying sesame, he came up with a chiddush. We have this. Rabbi Akiva met Rabbi Yeshua in the marketplace. They have the Rabbanim. They went to the supermarket, but they went to the supermarket while they were studying Torah. So that's what happened. So Rabbanai, the brother of Rabbi Chia Bar Abba, came to buy the sesame, and he said, Hacham Amar Shmuel, Eid v'dayim mitzdarf. And he says, you could combine the witness and the judge on the hempik to be Mekayim the shtar, to say that the contract is valid. So Amar Meimar Kama Ma'alya Shmaita. Meimar says, that's beautiful. Amar Le Ravashi Meimar Mishum de Kolsa Avu Dimech Anam Kalsaway. So he says, because he's praising the father of your mother, which is Rashi tells us is Rami Bar Chama, therefore you also are praising him. But Rav already pointed out that this logic isn't work, because at its core the witness is testifying only about his signature on the document, and the judge is certifying the document. So they're two separate testimonies. Excuse me, so they can't be combined. Amar Rav Safra. Amar Rav Yaba, Amar Rav Yitzchak Bar Shmuel, Bar Marta, Amar Rav Huna, Bar Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav. Let's say three people were sitting down. Three people were sitting down to certify a contract. Shnai Makirin Chasimus Yidei Edom. Two of the judges recognized the signature of the witnesses. The Echad Eino Makir, and the third one does not recognize the signature. So let's say they wrote it down, but they've not yet signed. So then what can you do? Me'idim in front of the third person. The two other people testify before the third judge who's sitting there. V'chosem. And then he can also join with them in signing that we recognize these signatures. But Mishachasmu, but once they've already signed the document, so then once they've signed it, they're not allowed to testify before him and allow him to sign. Because we would say the Misha Chasmu, let me just repeat this. Misha Chasmu, Amy Idim Befanim. Once they've signed the documents, they're not allowed to testify before him and for him to sign. Rashi says the chasima kamaisa because since he already signed it, b'shikra, he did it falsely. There weren't three people who knew it at that point. He didn't know it. Mar says, how can you even write the handpick in the first place that says that they sat before us and we recognize their signatures? This handpick that the judges are certifying the contract. And that if it was written prior to the witnesses testifying about their signature, if it was written prior to it, then we're going to say psua, it's disqualified. The michsei kishikra, because it looks like it's false. They wrote the document before they actually knew that it was true. And achinami mischazi kishikra. So here too, if the third judge signs it before they testify, it looks like it's false. Ella ema, but rather you have to read the text as follows: the statement that Rav Huna said in the name of Rav. Prior to them writing it, the two witnesses could testify before the third judge. And he can sign on it. But once they wrote it, and once they write it, they're not supposed to testify before him and for him to sign. So we learn from here, Shema Minat Tlas, we learn from Rav Huna, we learn from the statement that Rav Huna said in the name of Rav, we learned three things. What are three things we learned? That this witness can become a judge, because we have the two witnesses who testify about the signatures before the third judge. That's the first thing. Shema Minat Eid Nasadayin, a witness can become a judge. Shema Minat, what do we learn out the second thing? Dayanan Amakirin Chasima Sidei Edim. If you have judges who recognize Dayanan Amakirin Chasima Sidei Edim, if you have judges who recognize the signatures of witnesses, you don't need to testify in front of these judges because these judges recognize the witnesses, and only the witnesses only the judge who didn't recognize it requires testimony, but the other ones don't need it because they recognize it. The judges themselves are able to uphold it. From the fact that Rav Huna says in this case that the two judges who recognize their signatures, they're able to sign, and there's no other testimony before them. And then what is the third thing that they learned? Shema Mina. The third thing we learned was Dayan and She'ema Kirin Chasimos. The third thing we learned was if there are judges that don't recognize the signatures of the Eidim Shichan L'Haya B'fnei Kol Echad V'Echad. If there are judges who don't recognize the signatures of the witnesses, it's not sufficient for the witnesses to testify before two of the judges, and then just third judge will just join with them. But rather, we need the witnesses to testify before every judge, because therefore these witnesses are testifying before the third judge. So those are the three principles Rav Huna learned. One, aid can become a dayan, a witness can become a judge. Number two, we learned that if the judge recognizes the signatories, he doesn't need witnesses. And the third thing we learned is that the witnesses need to testify before every judge. So Rav Ashi says, he says, I'll grant you the first one. Says Rav Ashi, I'll grant you the first one. That makes sense. Fine. What about this fact that you said that if the judges that if the judges do not recognize, if the judges recognize the signatories, the witnesses do not need to testify before them. Maybe it's a totally different case. Maybe I would say to you that really the judges the witnesses wouldn't need to testify for the judges, even if they recognize it. But what is this case? Why is this case different? Shani Acha, why is this case different? Because in this case, what's the reason that the witnesses do not need to come before these judges? Because their testimony is being certified by the other two judges, and so therefore they're basically included in this idea of testifying about their signatures, so at least having a little bit of the testimony. But if all three judges would have recognized the signatures, maybe in that case we would have required somebody to testify, just so we should have at least somebody testifying about the signatures. We would have that accomplished. In this case, however, because these two witnesses are testifying. But if they weren't testifying, maybe we would require, if all three of them recognized signatures, maybe we would have ironically required two witnesses to come. And what about the third chiddush that we learned from Rav Huna Marav, that Dayanin she'ein makir chasimos yideidim tzrichim la'ayim b'fnei kol echad ve'echad, that for every judge who doesn't recognize a signature, the witnesses need to testify before each and every judge. Dilma, maybe that's not true. Dilma lo'om emolach ein tzrichim. Maybe they don't need to testify before every judge. V'shani acha. So why did this witness need to come? Because since the witnesses on the contract are not in front of us, and so therefore nobody has come forward and said that this is my signature. We see as a result of this that if the two judges don't testify that they recognize it before the third judge, there won't be any agada of the edus. And so therefore, in this case specifically, we need to say it. But in a case where there was agada, maybe it wouldn't be required. So Yosef Rabbi Abba So Rabbi Abba was sitting there and he repeated this teaching that a witness can indeed become a judge. So Rabbi Safra challenged Rabbi Abba. From the Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah, it says, if who sees the court, if you're seeing a new moon, who saw it? The three people who saw it, and they were themselves the betin that was in charge of making a new moon. So what should they do? Two of them should get up to testify, and then they should take two of the students from the gallery and make them on the betin. Now you have three. And then they would certify the new moon. Because one individual is not able to be the court. And if we're saying, like Rav Huna Marav said, that the witness can become the judge, why do we need to bring in two people off of the student gallery? Why do we need to do that? Let these two witnesses remain as the judges, and they could sanctify the new moon. After they testify, they'll go and be the judges. Amrway. So when Rav Safra says this to Rabbi Abba says, this was also difficult to me. And Rav said, this question went all the way back to Rav, and Rav said, this testimony about the new moon, leave it alone. Don't compare. Don't say, well, why don't we let the witnesses be the judge there? Because this is a biblical law about testifying about the new moon, about sanctifying the new moon. Biblically, you need a person for that. Testifying about the new moon is a biblical law. So biblically, you need to come and testify. But for Kiyum Shtaros, this whole idea of certifying a contract, that's rabbinic. That's Rabbanan. Biblically speaking, you don't need to certify the contract. Okay, so we'll stop here. And if anybody has any questions,